I believe, actually, that we have our next guest on the line, so I might come back to you on that point, Olivia. So bear that in mind. Stay with us, because joining us now is the Shadow Financial Secretary to the Treasury, James Murray. Good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us. So I believe that you're here to talk about the energy price cap, and we are going to be speaking about that in just a moment. But we are now talking about the teachers' strikes, which are coming up on the 1st of February. So I do want to get your thoughts on that and how Labour would deal with this crisis in teaching. Teachers say that they're struggling to recruit and retain staff. They want a salary to match inflation. What would Labour do about this?
Look, our approach to the industrial action, which is coming in education, is similar to our approach for other industries, other sectors, which is to say, if we were in government, we would be getting around the table. We'd be making sure trade unions and employee representatives were around the table and striking a deal to avoid strikes going ahead, because no one wants strikes to go ahead. The general public don't want strikes to go ahead. Workers don't want strikes to go ahead, and the government shouldn't want them to go ahead either. And if we were in government, we would be doing everything possible to get around the table and strike a deal to make sure that strikes wouldn't go ahead.
With the greatest respect, that doesn't mean anything, though, does it? I mean, it's an argument you've used with things like the RMT and with nurses where negotiations weren't necessarily happening. 6 hours of negotiations yesterday. They are getting round the table. They are talking. Just saying you would strike a deal, well, what? What sort of deal? I mean, that's the key to all of this. They're not going to take any old deal, are they?
Look, the principle about having negotiations to avoid industrial action going ahead is that you sit down around a table and negotiate. So, when I and my colleagues come on your channel and others, and people ask us, well, what would you offer? What would be your deal you would strike? That kind of misses the point, because the point is that it's about negotiation and it's about sitting down in good faith and trying to get that deal to avoid strikes going ahead. And, the Education Secretary, the government have known that these issues have been coming for a long time with teachers. They should have been working hard to avoid getting to this point. But the same principle applies to other sectors as well. That principle of negotiation, that principle of sitting down around the table, striking a deal, is what the public wants to see. They want ministers to take some responsibility for this and to try and avoid strikes going ahead.
So what you're saying is what the government is doing in regard to the teachers is exactly the right thing then, because you do exactly the same.
Well, the government should have been getting ahead of this problem. They should have been having those discussions with the teachers' unions. They should be trying to avoid this going ahead, and they should also be thinking about the long run. Making sure that they've got better resources within education. We've spoken about ending private schools' tax breaks and using that money to support education. We should be looking at the long run, but we should also be making sure that strikes don't go ahead, and that is through negotiation. And there's no quick solution to a lot of these difficult issues. The principle about negotiation is that both sides have to compromise, but it is about hard graft. It is about sitting down at those tables along ahead of the issue coming to a head and trying to avoid strikes going ahead in the first place.
To ask you about the front page of the Daily Mail today, your colleague, the Labour MP Rosie Duffield, speaking out about her experience being jeered, she says, by male colleagues in the Commons. She has compared being in the Labour Party to being in an abusive relationship. She says that the party has a woman problem. Does the Labour Party have a woman problem?
This headline that you referred to and the debate which it connects to has been a really difficult debate in Parliament over the last week. I think from my point of view, it's very important to reform the gender recognition process. It's something that needs to be modernised. It's something that the Labour Party is committed to, but it's a very sensitive topic, and it deals with refers to a group of people, trans people, who are very marginalised and obviously subject to a lot of transphobia and so on. It needs to be dealt with very sensitively and carefully. And I think what's really sad about the debate this week is that trans people, trans rights have been used as a political football by some. You've got women who want a reassurance over safe spaces, not getting that reassurance. And also you've got, a row over devolution at the same time. And actually, what this debate, what this very difficult issue really needed was for the Scottish and UK governments to get together and come to a way through this thorny issue, this difficult issue, this delicate issue that needs to be discussed with goodwill and level heads. And that's not what's happened. There's been a failure of leadership from the Scottish and UK governments on this delicate issue.
What and when you with that criticism, then do you level that criticism at Rosie Duffield as well?
Well, look, I'm not going to start having a go at individual people in this debate, because I think the whole debate has actually not served the purpose that I believe it should. What we want is a modernisation of the gender recognition process. It's a delicate matter. It involves trans rights, and trans rights have been used as a political football many a time. Trans people are often, very exposed to being attacked, being very marginalised, and so on. There are also women who are concerned about single-sex spaces and seeking that reassurance. And as I said as well, there is the whole row over devolution, which is folded into this debate as well. And what needed to have been done is for the Scottish government and the UK government to sit down with level heads and goodwill and come to a way through this issue and try to modernise the law in a way that is respectful for trans people and gives women who are concerned about single-sex spaces the reassurance that they need too.
When you say it's been used as a political football, I think a lot of people would agree with you on that. Are you of the mind there, because I want to clarify some of this, are you of the mind that Nicola Sturgeon has done anything wrong here? Because there is an argument to say she's pushed this through because she knew this would happen in Westminster.
Well, I think that the Scottish government should bear some responsibility for the situation we're in, alongside the UK government, because I think that, this has been coming for a long time. This is not something that has, just appeared out of nowhere. We've known this is coming. And actually, if both sides, if you like, if both governments, the Scottish government and the UK government, had those detailed discussions earlier on about making sure that the legislation was designed in the right way, that it was achieving the goals about modernising the gender recognition process, which is something that is desperately needed, whilst providing the reassurances or the safeguards that people also feel is necessary. We could be in a very different place, I think, if the Scottish government and the UK government had behaved differently in the run up to this. And that's my position, and that's Labour's position. In that if we had, if we were in government, we would have had those discussions, many weeks and months ago, to avoid it coming to a head in this way that I think hasn't really helped anyone. I don't think it's done anyone any good to have this row in this way.
Labour have been very busy in the past few weeks, haven't they, outlining policy, outlining their plans for the NHS, for schools. But we'll talk about the NHS for the moment. Keir Starmer has been quite bold and made some suggestions of how he'd like to reform the NHS over Labour. He's talking about it being important that it's free at the point of use, but he hasn't ruled out privatisation. And for the left-hand side of the party, that's going to make them quite nervous, isn't it? Because they want to be injecting cash and giving those pay rises to NHS workers. Do you think there could be an upcoming rift in the Labour Party about how to reform the NHS?
I think there is total unity in the Labour Party about the need to get the NHS out of the crisis it's in. And I think what's really important in terms of how to get the NHS out of that crisis is to recognise that, yes, there is a component which is about extra funding for the NHS, which is why we've said we would scrap the non-dom tax status and use some of that money to expand the NHS workforce, with the biggest NHS workforce expansion in its history. But alongside that, we have to reform the NHS. We can't just continue with the NHS exactly as it is now and put more money into it and hope that everything will come right. We need to reform the NHS at the same time as supporting it financially. And those are the plans that Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting have been setting out, the importance of reform. Wes Streeting has been setting out the principles of reform, some of the ideas, some of the areas in which we might focus in government. But having that reform alongside the funding is the way to make sure the NHS remains this, incredibly valuable public service for us all, which is free at the point of use.
But I mean, part of the problem with all of this, right? I mean, you talk about non-dom status and all the rest of it, and windfall taxes. None of them actually hit the marks when it comes to funding all the things that you've outlined. And I know today Labour is outlining a change to the energy price cap because you think it's not right that that the energy price cap is going to start going up this year, so it's going to cost us all more. You say you want to do more to help us all out with that. But again, where does the money come from?
Every policy that we've set out is fully costed and fully funded. If I can just briefly point out, you mentioned the NHS workforce there. The non-dom tax status, there is independent research by Warwick University and the London School of Economics, which shows that scrapping the non-dom status would raise £3.2 billion a year. We would use some of that money to go towards the NHS workforce expansion plans that we've set out. So that is fully costed and fully funded. Now, when it comes to the energy situation, the energy prices situation that families across the country are facing, we've set out that we would strengthen the windfall tax. Now, the windfall tax is something that we've been calling for since over a year ago, since January last year. Yet every time the government has introduced elements of a windfall tax, they've left loopholes or they've left weaknesses in it, which we think should be strengthened or the loopholes closed. Now, the three different things that we think should be strengthened at the moment is, firstly, the rate should be increased slightly, so it's in line with that which is charged in Norway. We believe it should be backdated to January 2022, which is when we first called for the windfall tax and when oil and gas giants were making record profits. And we believe the investment allowance, which is essentially a way of giving a tax cut for companies who are putting money back into North Sea oil, that should be got rid of because it's not the right way to spend public money. And if you took those three measures to strengthen the windfall tax, make it a proper, effective windfall tax, that would raise just over £13 billion over this 2-year period. And we're saying some of that money should be used to keep the energy price cap from April at its current level of £2,500 rather than it rising to £3,000, which is the government's plan. Now, that would give immediate help to people in the months ahead from April onward. But alongside that immediate help, we're also saying that we should invest for the long run. And for us, that means two things. Firstly, investing in insulation in people's homes so they're more energy efficient. And secondly, investing in clean and renewable energy sources. And together, that insulation and clean energy would save households £1,400, and that would be a permanent long-term saving.
OK, well, look, James Murray, we appreciate you having a good long chat with us this morning. It's really good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.